Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. It is a pleasure and a privilege to bring you this incredible platform. We've been working hard at it, and it's finally here. So we're so excited to bring you this amazing platform, which we call the Zevoli Round Corner. My name is Simo Vilagazi. I am the Business Development Manager at Zevoli Growth Partners. And today I'm joined by an amazing lady. She's our leader. She's a fearless leader who's done incredible work in the enterprise and supply development space. I won't take up too much time introducing her, but she will introduce herself. But essentially, we are excited to bring you this amazing platform because we hope to enlighten, engage, and inspire you, to do well in your enterprise and supply development programs, but also as well to ensure that you bring about meaningful impact to all the communities that you work with. So please help me, everyone. Welcome, Ms. Mpopi Khupe.
Thank you, Simo. You had me at fearless. I aspire to be many things. Fearless is not one of them. But what I do insist is to do anything and everything afraid. So fear doesn't dictate, but I don't think it's an emotion that one never has to grapple with. I'm very excited that we finally hit this
Yes.
milestone and gotten to this point. Of course, SME capacity building is something that we're passionate about at Zivoli. But I really am looking forward to the dialogue that we're going to have with the market around the collective change that we're all trying to have. And I think for me, the emphasis is why. Like, why are we trying to do this? What is the impact that we want to have? What's the legacy that we want to leave behind? And for us, the areas and the communities that are particularly important is rural and peri-urban, as you know. So thank you for having me, and I look forward to the discussion.
Brilliant. Well, once again, welcome everyone. And today, really, we want to bring you an amazing topic. You've had a look at all our social media platforms, and we've been very direct in terms of communicating what the message we want to put through. So today, we're going to be talking about what the theory of change is, demystifying what the theory of change is, helping you also create and implement it in your organization, but also as well help you understand how to go about the journey of implementing a theory of change in your business. So essentially, I'm not the expert. I'm just here to look pretty. The lady of the moment is here with me. She'll be taking all your questions. So please do send us your questions as well as we have the chat. And really, we look forward to all the engagements that we're going to have on this amazing platform. So really important. I mean, we've talked about what the theory of change is. Both you and I know what it is, but essentially people, as they watch, if supply chain, HR executive, corporate social responsibility managers, to them, what is a theory of change?
I'm going to start by correcting you. An expert. It's interesting. This is an area that I think we're all constantly learning, and may I never get to a point where I feel like I'm an expert because I worry that I'll lose my curiosity to learn. But what we know so far and what we've come to understand about it so far is I like to draw a parallel between the strategy and the theory of change. And it's easier for me when we say, if the strategy is the what, then the theory of change is the how. And it's an important distinction, I think, to start as a departure point, because we tend to think that if I have a great strategy, it gives me enough for me to execute it successfully. And I think the absence of a theory of change has taught us that that's not necessarily true, because what the strategy is not is the roadmap. And what the theory of change starts to give you is an ability to articulate how you're actually going to achieve that which you've spelled out in your strategy. So we know that, of course, a strategy, amongst other things, would typically articulate the vision, mission, and purpose or goals. I find we use those words interchangeably, purpose and goals. But what the theory of change allows you then to do is to take that articulation and start to cascade it down. So if I'm clear on my vision, mission, and purpose, what I can then do is I can take the sum of those and become clear on my mission statement or my impact statement.
Yes.
And that's where you start with the theory of change. So if this is where I want to go in 3 to 5 years, what tangibly do I want that to look like when I start to execute it, so that I'm able to measure the extent to which I'm achieving that theory of change?
Absolutely. And I think one of the important things about a theory of change is that it is a tool, right? It is a tool that anyone can use in order to ensure that they, achieve the impact that they want to in their communities. So essentially, why is it so important? Why is it such a powerful tool to bring about social impact?
More than anything, because it gives you the ability for that which you said you're going to do to be measurable. And so it holds you accountable, right? I think for me, that's probably the most important thing about it. Like, how am I going to know that I've achieved what I said I want to achieve? But also, secondly, and probably equally powerful, is it gives you the ability to test different approaches, different mechanisms, different tools that you have in your toolbox, and change your mind. Because I find that what happens is, again, if you go from strategy to execution, you don't really have that ability to say, I'm going to actually trial different things and either tweak, completely change my mind, or start to keep repeating that which works. So in the theory of change exercise, as I said, you typically start with your impact statement. And then you've got to say, okay, so what outcomes am I trying to achieve? So in essence, you're cascading it down to the granularity that will allow you to tomorrow morning start executing. But
Yes.
you literally say, if this is my impact statement, what are the outcomes that I want? Now, with outcomes, you normally would say, what are the immediate outcomes that I want? The short term, the medium term, and the long term. But the outcomes will be informed by a series of outputs. So in order for me to get to these outcomes, what are the outputs that I want to see? In order for me to get to these outputs, what are the activities that I want to be engaging in? In order for me to successfully execute these activities, what inputs do I require? So the theory of change allows you to cascade all the way down from, if this is my impact statement, what are the inputs, activities, outputs, outcomes that will get me to that point?
So it is then, as we say, that a very powerful also communication tool. And it also, touches a lot on the stakeholders that we deal with, in the communities where corporates operate in, especially, corporates such as mining companies, oil and gas, petrochemicals, where typically you'll find them in very rural and peri-urban settings, where access is very limited and opportunities are limited, but also as well information. Now, from a communication point of view and a stakeholder management point of view,
Yeah.
how important is it, the theory of change that is, how important is it in that setting?
It's a really great communication and transparency tool. I say transparency because what we find is there's skepticism if you don't give me information that I feel I need in order for me to trust your intentions and be kept abreast of what you're doing in my community. So it's a really great tool for the stakeholders that you have, particularly in the communities, to have a good understanding of what you're up to and therefore formulate an opinion about the extent to which either they align with it, trust it, want to critique it, want to be a part of it, etc., etc. As part of the inputs that I mentioned earlier, a critical one is actually stakeholder mapping, because part of what you need to be trying to answer with your theory of change is, who am I doing this for and why am I doing it, right? Of course, the lion's share of your stakeholders are your SMEs, but there are other stakeholders for whom this would be of interest. This is a social impact agenda.
Yes.
The beneficiary is the SME, but the interested parties go beyond the SMEs. It includes your shareholders, your local stakeholders on the ground, government to some extent, peers, and any other stakeholders for whom this initiative or these efforts are of interest. And the theory of change allows you to communicate to all of them in the manner that's appropriate and relevant to them.
And also, when we come to relevance and ensuring that it is relevant to the community that you speak to, but also as well to the small businesses. For me, obviously, our main interest is around the small business owners, the entrepreneurs who predominantly are in peri-urban and rural environments. So for them, what becomes the importance of a theory of change? What should they look for from a corporate that puts out a theory of change? And how can they buy into the value that it brings?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for me, the way I look at it is this: if there are multiple corporates in and around a certain community, each of those corporates would typically have an ESD strategy, right? And the ESD strategy would again articulate their 3 to 5 year plan.
Yes.
What tends to happen is we move from the ESD strategy to a combination of programs and initiatives that we execute on the ground. The trouble with that is, to the extent that we don't have access or visibility of each other's strategies, we are likely to find we're duplicating, overlapping, replicating very similar programs. And naturally, that means that there will be gaps that we're not filling. The sum of all of us are implementing programs but there are certain areas around what success needs to look like for SME capacity building that we're not getting to because we don't understand each other's theory of
Yeah.
change.
Yeah.
And now, if we all then cascade our respective strategies to our respective theories of change, what potentially happens is, because I typically have a view of your theory of change, and because again, this is typically a diagram that normally sits on the website or is quite easy to access versus a strategy, I can then say, okay, so Simo Core is already in the community that I'm in. This is his theory of change. And therefore, as I'm framing mine, ideally, I should be trying to close the gaps that he's
Yes.
not getting to.
Yes.
That's a really important thing because it allows each corporate to focus on a very specific problem statement. And then for the sum of the corporates, ideally in that area, to say, if we do these individual things collectively, this is the impact that we're each going to have. But I'm going to be measured on the extent to which my theory of change has answered my impact statement. Now, where does this matter for the SME? SMEs normally, the first time that they experience what a corporate is up to in their area is when they're being invited to respond to an opportunity to be part of a program. The challenge with that is you don't know necessarily what the problem statement of that program is. And ideally, the problem statement of the program should also be framed by what the theory of change is. Now, if we get to a point where each corporate has a theory of change and is publicly available, and I'm an SME who's now being invited to enroll in a program, ideally, if I look at the theory of change and I look at the program requirements, I can find whether or not that's aligned with my needs. But it also requires of the SMEs to be honest with themselves around where do I need the most help. So if I'm clear that I'm an early stage business and I need the biggest support in refining my proposition and taking it to the market, and I look at the corporate theory of change and I look at the program KPIs or the program desired outcomes, which would be linked to the theory of change, I can immediately say whether or not this is the right program for me. And that would become a really powerful tool for a number of reasons. One, you'll get the right SMEs in the right program. You will get SMEs not program hopping, but also you will get corporates executing programs that actually allow them to say whether or not they're achieving the desired impact, because they'd be tunnel focused on the impact that they want to lead with.
Very important statement. Essentially, from that statement for the corporates as well as for the small business as well, very important is value alignment. Aligning the corporate's value with the community's value. That's a critical statement. And that's essentially what the theory of change is. It provides those pathways to ensure that the values do align, so that ultimately we can achieve the outcomes that we desire. All right. In terms of indicators, I mean, obviously, as you implement the theory of change, it is a practical tool to be implemented. Just give us a sense of some of the indicators that one would look for when they, just reviewing a theory of change framework.
Well, when you're developing it, so again, let's start with your mission statement or your impact statement, right? So again, I'm assuming that you've got a vision, mission, and goal. So what you're doing is you're making that slightly more granular and tangible, right? That's the objective of the impact statement. So if you start there, what you're trying to answer for yourself is, how will I know when I've achieved this mission, vision, and purpose? Okay. And so you've got to frame your impact statement in that manner. And now you talk about values. Values for me almost plays a role at that level where it is speaking to the vision, mission, purpose, and the mission statement or the impact statement. That's where you can almost gauge value alignment. When you start to cascade it below that, for me, it talks to alignment to the purpose. Now, what you're trying to answer there is, every day, what I am busy with, does it add value to where we're going? So it doesn't really align directly to the values as you're alluding to, but the purpose is to say the activities that we're busy with, do they add to or do they deter from the impact statement? So that my resources, which are limited, are adding to that and not distracting us from it. This is an important thing because you find that teams, stakeholders, strategic partners, all our inputs are busy. If you go into any ESD function on a typical day, people are busy with something.
Yeah.
But they aren't always able to answer whether that directly links to the impact statement or that takes away from the impact statement. And that ability to cascade down gives you the mechanism to know as an individual and a role player, as a stakeholder, as a strategic partner, as an SME, whether what I'm busy with is adding to the impact statement or deterring from it.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, from an adaptability point of view, what I love about the theory of change is because community development, stakeholder engagement, small business development, and capacitation is a very dynamic field. It changes almost all the time. One of the critical things about the theory of change is that it allows you to, to be very effective in your change management.
Yes.
As conditions shift,
Yes.
so it shifts with the
Yes.
conditions as well.
Yes.
And so, as one of the key and critical value propositions of a theory of change is exactly that.
Yeah.
On the change management.
Yeah. I want to add to what you're saying. As the conditions change, as our assumptions change, as the risks change,
Yes.
it really allows you to respond to anything that doesn't prove to be what you thought it would be. And also, as I said, the risks as well. So I always say to people that, the strategy ideally, because it gives you a 3 to 5 year view, even though sometimes I think it's okay to change your mind about your strategy, but you don't want to do that too often because it creates chaos.
Yes.
But if your strategy is a statement about a moment in time, so in 3 to 5 years, I want to be here.
Yeah.
Your theory of change is your GPS.
Yes.
So
yes.
it's a very live document, and you should be okay with fiddling with it, because when you did the first iteration of it, it was typically based on circumstances that were true at that time. There were certain assumptions that I made, there were certain risks that I was aware of, and that's the point at which I framed this theory of change. As I implement, I start to realize some of my assumptions are wrong, some of the risks have changed. And
Yes.
ideally, then you should be able to go back to that and say, okay, so maybe these activities no longer make sense because what was true then is no longer true today. And so one should be very comfortable with the idea that they will continue to fiddle with it. What shouldn't change too much is probably your impact statement.
Yes.
But your inputs and your activities and your outputs, those things should really be able to be agile as the truth at the time changes in the environment that you're operating.
And those are the things that on an ongoing basis, those are the things that you measure and evaluate constantly. But also your true north remains your impact statement.
Correct.
What you want to achieve within that particular community.
Correct.
Right. So for one of the things that we've actually done as part of this series, or as part of this talk today, discussion, is that we've put out a white paper. And the white paper essentially goes into more depth about what we're talking about. And some of the things that you've mentioned on the white paper is, from a practical point of view, how one can go into actually establishing the roadmap or starting a starting position to implementing the theory of change.
Yeah, so I look at it from a how perspective. I look at it almost the same way as you would a strategy, right? So typically, how do we go about developing a strategy? You bring your team around a table, and you're quite clear on what it is that you want to, what you hope will find expression in your strategy, right? So I want us to be clear on our vision, mission, and purpose. Why? Because I want us to be clear on where we're going over the next 3 to 5 years. And then you workshop all of that with your team, and the conclusion, or at the end of the day, what you will have is a clearly articulated strategy, but with the true north being vision, mission, and purpose. The approach is very similar. With the theory of change, you do need to bring the team around the table and take those 3 elements and workshop what becomes your impact statement, and then cascade it down. It's post-its, it's engagements, it's breakaway sessions. The format is very familiar, but the questions that you're asking are very different. And so you've got to be clear on, once you've got your impact statement, you've got to then say, okay, so how am I going to measure the extent to which we've achieved this? And that's where you answer your outcomes. And your outcomes, as I said, normally is short-term, medium-term, long-term. And then you start to just has cascaded until you get to your inputs and activities, because that allows you to say, if I get up from here, tomorrow morning, what am I busy with, and what's the relationship between what I'm busy with and how it rolls up into what's going to get me to a point where we can say whether or not we're achieving our impact statement.
And essentially, what we're aiming for, right, is really to, for us at least, as Volunteer partners, we're aiming to be partners to corporates who are looking to put together a compelling theory of change. That essentially, I mean, we're not there to change the furniture, right? And that's not what a theory of change assumes. It just says you have a strategy, you have an ESD, you have ESG goals, you have a social and labor plan in place, you have a business strategy in place. What it typically will take that is take those plans and those strategies and just make it implementable and practical
And measurable.
and
I think for
measurable.
me,
Yes,
at the core is
yes,
measurable. So if you have, again, a range of commitments in however manner you framed it, how are you going to know when you've achieved them or not? And that's where this comes to play. What's nice about it is once you've got a theory of change in place, it naturally links to the things that you're trying to answer in different spaces. Somebody's writing an ESG report and is trying to find expression around what you're doing in the social. Somebody's got tasked with the topic of sustainability and they're trying to find expression around, are we doing this? Are we operating sustainably in the communities that we're in? And what's our relationships with the stakeholders in those communities? Crystallizing a theory of change at a operational level, you can say, okay, I'm having this much impact. But the aggregation of that storyline feeds into many other stakeholders' interests, including your board and your shareholders.
yes, yes, yes. Just on that, how can one ensure that they get the buy-in from, especially from the very executive, the board level, just making sure that you get the buy-in organizational wise.
People like clarity.
Yes.
People like clarity, right? We sign off strategies, but we want to be clear on how I'm going to know whether or not we've achieved this. Particularly because in our context, of course, you're asking for enterprise and supply development money. Show me one corporate affairs director who hasn't been asked, what is the impact of this money?
Yes, yes,
So it
yes.
really makes it very easy for you to have conversations around where we're going and why should we do this? Why should I care about what we're doing? And then how much do you need from me in order for you to do it? So it helps with those
Yes,
kind of
yes.
conversations because you speak with clarity. And yes, we're altruistic in our objectives, but you almost you move away from the softness of the conversation to the tangible, quantifiable impact of the conversation. So it empowers you to have the right conversation, even with your internal stakeholders.
Yeah, yeah. So once again, to everyone that's joined us, please continue to engage with us on all our social platforms. Also engage with the white paper that is brilliantly written, so that you can get a sense of what we're actually talking about. It goes much into more detail, rather, about what we're discussing, and also breaks down the practical steps of doing or undertaking a theory of change exercise. I think just as part of our closing remarks, one of the things that obviously we're very passionate about is from a small business development point of view, and also catalyzing the theory of change. One of the first things I led with was demystifying what a theory of change is.
Yeah.
I don't know whether we've gotten a sense out there that people are now much clearer about what a theory of change is, but essentially, as Zivoli Growth Partners, we do have a theory of change, and people are welcome to look at our impact report that we put out last year as well. We are working towards our 10-year
Our 10 years of
impact
impact
report.
report. Oh.
Yeah, and really that stems from the fact that we've done all this work and we want to showcase it, and we want to showcase the people that have benefited, especially the small businesses.
Yes.
Yeah.
And for me, it was a challenge as well, right? We talk a lot about the impact that we have, but we don't write a lot about it. And I thought we've got to challenge ourselves to write an impact report and then challenge the market to normalize writing impact
Yes.
reports, because it's not the report for the sake of the report, but it forces you to crystallize your why and your how. And that sits in your theory of change. And all the report is you storytelling about the extent to which you've achieved that. So I'm quite excited about the idea of us normalizing that, and us making that publicly available, so that one, I know what each entity is up to, and therefore what kind of conversations we can have together, because we don't really have direct access to those kind of insights, and so it can cripple the kind of quality conversations that we're trying to have with each other. So I do encourage everybody to take on the challenge of creating a theory of change and then storytelling around it. I'm
Definitely.
wondering if we have any questions.
Yeah.
Are we able to check?
Are we able to check if we've got questions, comments? Right.
Okay. Okay, great.
But I guess, either way, right, we know that people always engage with us. Perhaps on your final closing remarks, Mpopi, what can you say to everyone that's joined us today?
For me, 2024 is the year of accountability. And the manner in which you can be held accountable is the clarity in which you're communicating that which you've been tasked with. And this is why mechanisms like the theory of change is something that I'm really excited about. I look forward to us telling our respective stories in a manner that's quantifiable and defendable. Again, I think we are all altruistic, otherwise, we wouldn't be in this space. But I just feel like we don't tell our stories enough. And we don't tell them in a tangible enough manner for
Yes.
people to say, I'm excited about the work that you're doing for this reason. So I'm looking forward to all of us really just taking on this challenge of saying, I have a great strategy. How do I cascade it down to something that's measurable? And then what do I give each of my role players,
Yes.
so that we're all pulling in the same direction? And we're clear when we're not, so that we can refine our ability to do so better.
Well, thank you so much, Pupe, for the wonderful insights. I certainly, have gained much more than what I came into the discussion with, and I'm pretty sure everyone at home who's joining us, you also had, some impactful insights that you've gained from this discussion. For myself, really, all I can say is thank you very much for joining us. As I mentioned earlier on, what we're looking to do is partner with all the corporates, partner with you as also as from the community of practitioners who work in the enterprise and supply development space. Essentially, we want to help you put together a compelling theory of change that essentially will drive meaningful impact to all your small businesses and all your communities, ultimately bringing about social impact and meaningful change in the lives of small business. So essentially from my side, thank you very much for joining us. It's been an amazing pleasure to have you on board. And we look forward to yet another engagement around Days of All Around Corners. Thank you very much.